I'm broke the boss, I flip the script. Super Trucker Podcast got me fully equipped. Left the noise behind, now I'm stacking green. Voyager Nation, make me live the dream.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Super Trucker Podcast. My name is Julian. I'm with Voyager Nation. I am in the safety department. I have some really special guests today on the podcast. Really excited. Starting off, we have Christina. You want to let us know where you're from?
Yes, thank you, Julian. My name is Christina. I'm the safety manager for Status Transportation, located in Orlando. We also have an office in Atlanta, Georgia. You guys can find us on Facebook, Status Transportation, or we have a website as well, which is statustracks.com.
Okay, and we also have my good friend John here.
Thanks for having me on your podcast. So a little background on me is I used to be a state patrol inspector. Did that for about 12 years, and I became an investigator with FMCSA. So I knocked on the company doors and did reviews at the company. Then I became a hazmat agent with the FAA. Now I'm a DOT consultant. I help truckers, whether you're a driver, an owner, whoever it may be. I try to provide education to the trucking community. Right. The number one way I do that is through a website I have called truckingwins.com, www.truckingwins.com. On this website, I've got forums, I've got videos, whether it's how to do a DQ file, how to handle drivers that tested positive, split sleeper berth, personal conveyance. And then every week I do a podcast similar to this, but I do it for members only. And then people have like a one-on-one ability to ask questions and get answers, not on just this topic, but any topic that arises. Okay. So no, I'm excited to be here, and I think we have a great topic in store.
Yes. So speaking of safety, I'm going to go ahead, John, and pass it over to you and let you dive into this safety topic we got for you guys today.
All right, so a big hot topic in the industry right now is the English language proficiency. Yep. Now, before we get into the actual meat and potatoes of how it happens now, it's always good to go back into history and get a little bit of background on it. If you go to the regulation under 391.11b2, because that's the regulation, and you look back way in the history, this paragraph for English language proficiency as written was originally written in 1973. Okay. Now, I was born in 1972, so I was 1 year old. This thing was written a year after I was born. And if you look at the regulation today, the actual regulation, the paragraph that I just referenced, it is word for word, verbatim, the exact same paragraph that was written in 1973. Okay. So they change regulations over time, but this particular one has never changed in darn near 50 years, as crazy as that is.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep, so now, how do they enforce it? That has changed. Okay. Now, I can't go back 50 years because I was 1 year old when they wrote it. Right. My career started in trucking, like I said, way back when as an inspector, probably 25 years ago. So let's reverse and go back to 2007 and 2008.
And before we do that, John, just for the folks out there who may not be up to speed in exactly what we're getting ready to talk about, in layman's terms, what are we beginning to discuss?
All right, so in that regulation, 391.11b2, it basically says you have to read and understand English and recognize traffic signs. And there's a new memo that just came out in May of 2025. It's right here. And we'll end up putting this like on our website or whatever to download if people need it. But this memo that came out in May of 2025, it came out kind of in relation to these crashes that have been happening with non-domiciled CDL drivers and, you know, people that can't understand English and read street signs, that it's been determined that it's unsafe for them to be on the road according to the government. Okay. So when we reverse back to 2007 and 2008, they published a memo just like this one. Ironically, the one from 0708 did place drivers out of service way back then. They have then placed drivers out of service and not out of service for this topic over the years. But the original memo when I started my career in 0708 placed drivers out of service if they violated this. Interesting, in 0708 they had an interview process and they had street signs that you would have the officer point to the driver and he had to explain the street signs. Okay. Then in 2016, they changed the memo. Didn't change the law, they changed the memo. And the memo then said, you know what? We're now going to not place drivers out of service. We're going to allow tools to be used to pass this regulation. Example, you could use smartphone apps. You could use a translator. You could use cue cards. So you could use anything you wanted to pass the inspection or be able to complete the inspection. And if you could complete it, you are not in violation.
So a driver could use a translating app themselves.
Yep, from 2016 until this memo in June of 25. So I had cases where inspection would happen, the officer would type in the notes, can't speak English, driver had to use a translator. I would data queue that under the old memo and I would win.
So drivers right now are required for a certain test to be passed.
Yes, so then 2007, 2008, it's very similar to the current memo. Okay. Then in 2016 to 2025, they had this translator app. Now, we'll get into the meat of what this says in front of me. Okay. We are now back to, this year in 2025, an interview process. This sheet right here has some questions on it. This is the sheet they actually give the officers when they're doing the inspection. I'm going to give you some examples. It says, where did you start your trip today? General question. Possible paraphrases. Where are you coming from? So you see what they're doing? They're going to start pulling a driver over, or they already have, pull a driver over, do a general driver interview. Ask them similar questions to these. Who are you driving for today? Who are you working for?
Right.
The driver has to answer these questions that are written right here on this piece of paper in the memo given to the officers. If they fail this driver interview, then they're done and they're placed out of service, and out of service until they can pass this memo, which, unless you're going to do Rosetta Stone in 10 hours, I don't think you're going to be able to all of a sudden start speaking English.
No. So how many mistakes will a driver be allowed to make in order to call it a failure?
Right. It doesn't say in here how many questions will be asked and how many they don't need to answer. This is very subjective in the first step of this process. So the driver gets pulled over, officer thinks that maybe they don't speak English, he goes straight to this 2-page document that says, here's the questions we should ask. Now, if the driver can answer them to the officer's satisfaction, which is subjective, then they go on to step 2. Step 2 is these 37 signs, and they're street signs.
Right. And John, before we get to the signs, I just have a question for you, Christina. In your company, so I know for ours, when we're doing our recruiting and our onboarding, once the orientations actually show up here, depending on, their first language or etc., we're in Florida, so we have different types of walks. So what we do is we actually have a list of questions similar to these that I personally make sure that the orientation can answer between me and him before we even start looking at the truck. It's almost like step 1. Do you guys do something like that also?
We do not have a specific list of questions that we would ask the driver, but as we conversate with the driver, we can understand on which level of English the driver is. So happily, we do not have cases where we have drivers that don't know English at all. Normally they do.
Right. And when they don't, or when you don't feel confident enough, are you upfront right at the moment? Are you explaining exactly why you're making the decision not to go forward?
Yes. So you know how the rules changed now, and they get pulled over and they get tested. We explain to the driver that even if we hire you, you're not going to make it because you're going to fail this roadside inspection.
Okay.
I'll tell you what I would do is, like, now that this memo is out, dated May 20th, 2025, I would use this memo in your orientation.
Right.
I would pretend I'm an officer. I would pull this memo out and I would read it at the safety manager. I would go straight to step 1 and I would ask them these questions. If I don't feel that they will pass this interview, then you shouldn't hire them, right? Okay. It's very subjective. It's not like a percentage of how many questions, but to ask every one of these questions, these are the questions that will be asked by the officer.
And that's a good point you brought up. So, behind the scenes, we were chatting and you kind of enlightened us on how accessible these questions and these signs you're going to get into shortly here are and are not.
Yeah.
So obviously you're the man to know. So you're the connection. So we actually have this here. But how hard and how, I guess, gray is the area of actually finding this information out there for a regular driver or authority?
Yep. So we'll go back to page 1, which is right here. The header on this says Internal Agency Enforcement Policy. Internal. Well, companies aren't internal, they're external.
Right.
So if you go on FMCSA's website right now, you will find this memo. But all of these questions that I just read on this piece of paper back in front, they are redacted. They're highlighted black. If you print it, you can't read any of these questions. So the internal memo for law enforcement is right in front of me.
Right.
The one open to the public redacts the questions. So you have to come up with your own series of questions. Do I agree with this? Not really. Because if you can't speak English, how are you supposed to study the questions if they're paraphrased different ways?
Absolutely.
You try to speak to me in Chinese, I have no idea. And if you change the words around a little, I can't study for that.
Right.
So I don't know what the government's trying to hide, but I have the memo because I used to be in law enforcement and a buddy of mine gave it to me. Am I going to tell you who it was? No, because it's an internal enforcement memo. But I think everybody should have it.
Right.
Now, when you talk about the redaction of that, the street signs, which is the second step. So I pull the driver over, I talk to him, I question whether he can speak English. I go through step 1, which is the driver interview, and I'm like, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's close, he's borderline, but he's kind of tracking and answering my stuff. Okay. Then what the officer has to do is they have to take these 37 street signs, traffic signs. They have to point to 4 of them, and the driver has to answer 3 of the 4 correctly. Problem is, we talked about the questions being redacted. When you go online, these 37 street signs are also redacted. It's in black. Now, the last page of the memo is this right here. It's the answer key. The answer key is to what these 37 signs mean. It's funny that you have to give an officer an answer key when they're the ones doing the questions,
right,
but you won't give the driver the answer key.
Right.
Now, I could see the argument. Well, if you give the driver the signs and the answer key, maybe they can memorize whatever sign is whatever answer. But I'll tell you, That's not going to be possible with the driver interview piece.
Right.
And you don't even make it to the signs if the driver interview piece is failed.
So you have to pass this to make it
To the
that
signs.
stage.
If you don't pass the driver interview, I ask them, where did you start your trip today? And they're like,
Blue.
where are you coming from? Yeah, purple. You know, if the answers are completely outrageous, they will fail right here and never make it to this. If they if they pass the interview, then they make it to the street signs.
So what happens if, let's say, I answer 4 correct signs, but they are not word to word with the one that you have answers?
Yeah, like an example, this one, it's a one-way sign, has an arrow pointing to the left. The answer is one way. If you say, that's a sign for a one-way street, you're going to pass that. But if they point to the sign and someone says, arrow, well, what does the arrow mean? It says one way right on the sign.
Right.
So if you just say arrow, he may not give you the benefit of the doubt. This is all subjective, though. So what's interesting about this back and forth with us is whether they're the questions and the answers or the street signs with the proper answer, it is very subjective. One officer may pass a driver, the other one may not.
Right.
And that is open for discussion. I've had some challenges where accents come into play. Someone's from China, they have a really strong Chinese accent. If they take a test, they'll pass the English-speaking test. They know what the signs mean, but their accents are so broken that the officer won't even give them the benefit of the doubt of speaking and understanding and being a safe driver. So what do? That's a tricky subjective situation.
So there is no way to fight on that. Like if you have an accent, the officer didn't understand you, and you failed the test, you cannot contest that. You have no other.
You can absolutely contest being placed out of service under this memo. It's called a data queue.
Okay.
Owner-operator partnership is very real. I got tons of guys who are making $4,000 take-home. Learn how you can do that by giving me a call at 863-342-5171. We are conveniently located in Lakeland, Florida. We are a Florida-based trucking company that is here to provide you resources to be successful. So once again, it's 863-342-5171.
So can anybody in the United States do a data queue for every violation if they feel that the officer misapplied the memo? Sure.
Yes.
Can everybody provide documentation and evidence that the officer's wrong? Sure. What would you possibly do? I'll tell you, if the officer put me out of service, I simply wouldn't say, I think you're wrong. I think you'd almost have to go to a language expert and go to like a hospital or some kind of speech therapist and have them evaluate you, provide you some medical documentation that you, in fact, can pass this memo. So what would I do if I really felt I was wrong? I would take this memo in its full context. I would go find a speech therapist and who's a doctor, a clinical person, and I would say, can you test me on this with your clinical expertise and evaluate whether I passed this memo? Then they could write you on their company letterhead with a medical determination that you did in fact meet the requirements of this in their opinion. Does that mean the data queue is going to win? No.
Right. So let me ask you a question. In this example, if you're getting stopped by the officer, what does the officer have to provide or record? Does he record your exact answer, or is it just his final decision, yes or no?
Well, any good officer, you know how we get pulled over for like bad tires or a chafing brake hose or maybe a logbook violation?
Yeah.
Most good officers will take a copy of the logbook. Most good officers will take a picture of the bad tire.
Right.
They'll gather evidence to prove this. So do I think an officer is going to go through this whole process of question and answer, step 1, signs? I'm sure that they're going to say, these are the questions I asked. Here was his response. Here's the 4 I pointed to. This is what he said.
Now,
and that supports him being placed out of service.
Now, second part of that question. Let's say, we have a driver and officer and they're just butting heads, right? Because that never happens. Is it in the driver's best interest, maybe possibly, to turn his camera on his phone as he's answering these questions? So let's say he is answering them in an acceptable way, but the officer is deeming it not. And then that way, when he goes into the data queue, and he can say, well, these were my answers at the time of the stop.
Well, what would be good there is you're not just going to want to do it without talking to the officer.
Right.
So what's funny about that is if you said to the officer, can I record this so I can show my answers in the event that I need to do a data? Well, then why am I even here doing the data queue if I can explain all that? Like, why am I even being evaluated this way? But if a driver wanted to and got approval from the officer saying, can I record this just for my own sake? If the officer says sure, then record it. If the officer says don't, I wouldn't go down that road, because now you're becoming contentious. And the officer is going to probably be less flexible with you in the first place. He wouldn't even bring you to this driver interview if you didn't say or do something that caused him to feel like you're not going to pass. Like, you see how we're all talking here today? Who thinks any of us would even make it to this memo?
Right.
None of us.
Right.
So if someone is that close to coming to the memo, they are super borderline. So being combative and non-cooperative, it ain't going to help you pass this process.
Understood.
So I wouldn't do that.
So at the end of the day, what you get from this is out of service.
Yep. So again, let's say we go through this whole memo, which is new now since 2025, and the officer says, I'm going to shut you down. It's not like a false log or an over-hours log where you get placed out of service for 10 hours. It's not like you do drugs or alcohol and they place you out of service for 24 hours. This is an indefinite out of service until you can prove successfully that you will pass this memo in the future. You just failed it today. And I don't think you're going to be able to like get shut out of service at noon and learn English by 10 o'clock.
Right.
So this is one where you're going to have to pull the truck over as a trucking company,
Okay.
Uber the driver to an airport, fly him back, fly another driver in, pick up the truck. So if you have any questions whether the driver's going to fail this memo, I would do all this yourself in orientation.
Right.
I wouldn't wait for an officer to do it. I would do it with my own company if I have anybody that's questionable.
So let's continue down this path that we're going. Let's say drivers gets put out of service. Now, let's say you are looking to bring a driver on who has this on their PSP. What is your suggestion and recommendations at that point?
Well, here's the thing. We all know what a PSP is. A PSP is a pre-employment screening program.
Right.
Any trucking company can spend $10 and get a history of all the violations for that driver for 3 years, right?
Right.
The driver signs to it. If I'm going to hire a driver and run their PSP and I'm going to find this violation out of service on their PSP, there's under zero circumstances I as a trucking company would hire him or her.
Okay.
The reason I wouldn't do it is it's so subjective. I mean, I'm not saying it's not a good thing for safety. I'm just saying it's very subjective because we're not, these officers are not speech experts, They're doing their best to follow a memo to document it and put a driver out of service and ultimately affect his career.
Right.
And the company's ability to earn money off of that driver's work. So if you have a PSP or a history and you have knowledge that he was placed or he or she was placed out of service, I wouldn't hire them back until I have no knowledge of it.
Okay.
So let's say the driver gets placed out of service and 4 years from now applies at my company. I run the PSP. I don't see the violation. It's not on their MVR because it's not a moving violation. I would hire the driver, but I'd use this memo. And now if he speaks good, I would say, okay, you're good. But am I going to take a chance hiring a driver with a history of this, putting him on my company? Then I drive and he gets in a crash and injures or hurts or kills somebody. And the officer at the time of the crash takes this memo out and fails him. Uh-oh. I have a PSP saying he was in violation and out of service a year ago. I hire him. He crashes and kills somebody, and he fails the inspection for this very thing he was placed out of service. You know what that means? It means for the last year, he is not qualified. It's like a sandwich.
Right.
There's a piece of bread here out of service, a piece of bread here out of service, then all that meat in the middle is rotten. You know what I mean? Because that stuff in the middle, every trip is in violation. And if I'm going to hire him in the middle, I ain't taking a chance. Now, if he applies for my company, there is no process with the government to appeal to. You can't write a letter to Washington, D.C. and appeal. Your data queue is your appeal. And again, if all you do is say, I think this is wrong, I do speak English, they're not going to approve that. I'd say you'd almost have to go get a professional's opinion, a diagnosis, and have somebody put in writing that's respected in the industry to say, I think the officer was wrong, this driver clearly can pass this. Then I would do it, but only if the data queue is approved.
So basically 3 years after this out of service, the driver has no chances to get back in business.
Well, I wouldn't say he has no chance. If I were a trucking company, I wouldn't give him a chance.
Right.
Will you have situations where a driver fails this, it's on his PSP, he gets terminated from the company, he applies somewhere else, someone runs the PSP and hires him anyway? Yeah. If he keeps applying, he's going to find a job somewhere.
Right.
But what kind of company wants to take that chance?
Right.
And if you want to take that chance, you can hire him, but you better hope he's good to go now. And what did he do in between this in the last year to go from failing this to passing it?
Wait.
So it's basically up to the company if they want to.
Yeah, there's no regulation that says you can't hire someone who was placed out of service.
Right.
But you got to make sure he's no longer out of service.
Right.
An example would be medically, right? If I'm missing an arm, I apply for a job. I don't have something called an SPE, which is a special physical examination that can be done by the government, where I actually apply and get an exemption for missing a limb because I can demonstrate that I can drive properly. Well, if I was pulled over for missing a limb and I got an SPE in between, then you could hire someone because they have the SPE now. Okay. So it's allowing them to operate because they fixed the problem. How do you guarantee this problem got fixed when there's no SPE?
Right.
There's no process for you to go to with the government. It is a very scary thing to do this. And where I'd be most fearful is hiring him back and getting in a crash. The second thing I would worry about is in a compliance review, when the government knocks on your door, they have acute violations. If the driver was out of service a year ago, then got pulled over on another inspection and was out of service again, every trip you had in the middle, it is questionable whether every one of those trips was using a driver not qualified because of the whole sandwich concept.
Okay. And, as we kind of, come to a close on this topic, I got to ask you, do you foresee any changes being made to this in the future? Any insight knowledge?
Well, interesting about that. Remember I said the rule has not changed since 1973.
Right.
But in 07, 08, they had a memo. In 2016, they had a memo. Now in 2025, they have a memo. Now I'm joking around, but 2007 to 16 is 9 years. 2016 to 25 is in 9 years. So, I predict 2034.
We'll have it changed.
2034, we're going to have another memo because it seems like every 9 years they publish a new memo. So, I mean, who knows? But this memo is the way that this is being enforced, not necessarily through change in regulation.
So as we speaking about changes of the regulations, are there any other changes going on in terms of inspecting a truck from DOT?
I mean, there's always changes that they come up regarding inspecting a truck or the driver, etc. There's a pilot project right now. This is a different topic, which we'll probably get into a different topic.
Yeah, I was going to say, definitely great question. And like I said, we're definitely going to create another segment here soon. But as far as this topic goes, John, I want to thank you so much for the wealth of knowledge that you bring. And guys, these are the facts. You know what's out there. You know what's coming. Prepare yourself. If you have an authority, as John said, and you're seeing this on PSPs, be aware of it. As Christina said, as you guys have orientations coming through, making sure you're aware, asking the tough questions up front versus a DOT officer doing it on the roadside. You guys got anything else to add in closing?
Just better be safe than sorry.
Yep. And hey, come find me at truckingwins.com. I got a nice little podcast every week similar to this, but it's more interactive. Instead of talking to two great safety people here today, you can just speak directly to me and answer any questions that you have. So thank you for the time, and we'll see you on the next podcast.
All right, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, share Super Trucker Podcast. Appreciate you guys. Till next time.
Operators looking for the best business owner opportunity, look no further. I got all the programs that are going to make you successful. Everything to operating from 2 different fuel cards, top of the line trailers with a maintenance program that is unbeatable, to plates, insurance, you name it, we got it. All you got to do is give us a call, 863-342-5171. Learn more and get started.